Good morning. It's wonderful to have you all here. I know there's this interesting filtering pieces. Some people arrive, some people get breakfast. Everyone is happy to say hello to everyone. I want to say welcome to Charles Wright Academy and welcome to the NWAIS Fall Educators Conference. Our school community is delighted to host you for this year's conference, and there's too many of our staff to thank, though I would like to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that the Charles Wright community has done to make this happen. I honestly just showed up this morning, as did the rest of you, but I say thank you to the Charles Wright Academy staff. And welcome to my man cave. I recognize that by having the opportunity for Charles Wright to host this, it provides me with the great opportunity to have 5 minutes to speak to you. And as the faculty and staff will tell you, I always like the microphone. As I get older, I've become increasingly aware of just how great our responsibilities as educators is and how increasingly fragile our existence as independent schools is becoming. Last night there was a reception at the Hotel Murano, and a couple of you asked if I was going to finish the story I began last year of the charging grizzly bear. Some of you were actually quite insistent. I use the charging bear metaphor for what I believe it can feel like to be an educator and an educational leader with all that is coming at us. But as someone who has stood in front of a charging grizzly with 1,000 pounds of jaws and claws coming at you, it's a pretty helpless feeling. It may be too desperate and frightening a metaphor for such a fine and refined and sophisticated group as you. So instead of being figurative this morning, I'm going to be literal. Indulge me just for a few moments. I want to talk to you about the world we're living in now. Because the ground upon which we are standing is shifting. And for many of us, our sense of normal, our sense of security, is not as certain as it has been in the past. I hope you hear these comments I'm going to make as observations and not as judgments, as hopeful, not as pessimistic. I'm trying to speak softly and put away the big stick. I want to share with you part of a conversation I had with faculty and staff here at Charles Wright in late August at our opening meeting, and that I shared later with our upper school students and their parents about the state of our country and our communities. For the past 3 decades plus, we've witnessed a steady increase in the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, those with access and opportunity and those without. This slow fire of inequity has been burning and fed by people feeling, not without some justification, that they were not getting a fair share of the pie of life. This has been blamed on immigration, legal and illegal, education, too expensive, too elitist, economic globalization, loss of control by states, loss of control by people, etc., etc., etc. This past year, we've witnessed a presidential election cycle and a presidency unlike any of us have ever witnessed before. It has unleashed, not created, but unleashed an avenue for this very real disenfranchisement and frustration to fester and be expressed. In riots in Ferguson, in professional athletes and Charles Wright football players kneeling during the national anthem, in violence and death in Charlottesville, over the protecting or tearing down of statues of Confederate Army soldiers, in violent confrontations between the alt-right and the Antifa, in uncivil behavior. This fire of anger has been burning slowly for decades, like hot embers waiting for oxygen, and now it's begun to spread out beyond the fringes of civil discourse and respectable thinking. It is driven by fear and anger, not critical thinking and empathy. And we are surrounded by more explicit acts of racism and bigotry and ugliness and hate. And so as educators, How do we help our students who are quickly becoming adults make sense of all of this? What is appropriate context, guidance, and perspective to give them that will help them develop their understanding of this shifting world? And what about us here at NWAIS? Who are we and how do we treat and interact with each other? We, faculty and administrators, are a group composed of different people with different ideas and different backgrounds. So how are we to engage constructively and civilly with each other? How can we collectively associate in the art and science of raising children well? How? Well, in no small part, we're all fortunate because we come together as a community and an association built upon shared values that guide us in how we act toward and how we treat each other. We all seek many of the same things. We seek to better ourselves. We seek to engage in the life of the mind. We seek to engage in civil discourse. We seek to learn. We seek to improve the human condition. We seek to be our best selves and to help our students and parents be their best selves. Because this is the ideal of education, and this is the purpose of our gathering today. That is why we're all here. So please take a moment and look around. Look around. Look around. You are surrounded by people who care, just like you do, about growing children well, about making a difference in the lives of children and making a difference in the world. We are the Northwest Association of Independent Schools. We are NWAIS. We are all educators who believe in our duty, responsibility, and opportunity to educate and grow children well so they can be their very best selves. We are the demonstrable presence of association. Our coming together is the power of association. Each of us come from a school with a different but similar mission that drives us toward an end. And what is the mission of our association? It's to support schools in achieving their individual missions. It's to cultivate excellence in leadership, to further diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's to encourage free and open inquiry, to foster collegial and collaborative relationships, and to champion our public purpose. And these are the reasons we're gathered here today: to share in community, to share in support, and to share in learning, to continue to strive to be our very best selves. The beauty of associating with each other is we are reminded of our individual differences, and the power of sharing is that we discover we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. Thank you. We're delighted to have you here today, and now I'd like for you to please welcome Siri, Akal, Khalsa, our Executive Director of NWAIS, whose remarks this morning will be in the form of a pechakucha. This is a format you'll have the opportunity to see throughout the day, 20 slides in 20 seconds each. Siri, Akal, you have 6 minutes.
Welcome, everybody. Matt, thank you for those kind words, and thank you for your uplifting thoughts. I think it's really important for us to focus on the prize ahead of us. In our day-to-day work, it's very easy to get entangled in the moment, but our work is much more important. Those moments add up to something really great, and you're what's making it happen. I also need to thank our wonderful staff. And I'm staring at Emily because she knows I'm going to embarrass her and ask her to stand up. Emily Rapp is our Associate Director, who is really the brains as well as the energy behind these great events. I also need to thank the Planning Committee. I think their names have been circulated up there. And they've done a wonderful job, as you can see. You may have noted that if you looked at the program for today, that all of our keynote speakers are women. Well, I'll attribute that mediocre response to the fact that it's still early, but when I share this with you, it may get a stronger response. This may be the first ever conference of this size in any of our associations across the country that has had 100% women keynote speakers, and I think that is a great statement. Thank you. Way better. Good job. So earlier this summer, Emily challenged me to talk about the future of our schools and to teach you how to tie a turban in a pechacucha. 20 slides, 20 seconds each slide. Like a fool, I accepted. NWAIS is focused on the future. As executive director, I visit dozens of schools each year to discuss the future with heads and boards. At every stop, I make a point to drop in on classes and see the great things that students are doing with you in their classes. I love talking to teachers and students. Students ask how I like their school. Teachers are curious about what's going on in other schools. Heads and trustees want to know what's trending in education. What's the future of our schools? What lies ahead? What will classrooms look like in 5 years? What new skills will teachers have to learn? How can we make our schools more affordable? Where's the next generation of school leaders coming from? What can we do to make our schools become more diverse? These are all great questions. How effectively we respond to these questions will help determine the future of our schools, what they will be in 10, 20, even 50 years. But important as those questions are, I always leave schools with the feeling that some burning questions are simply not being asked. One day it hit me, when everyone was too Northwest nice to actually ask me, what do you call that on your head? Do women wear it too? Does it go on like a hat? Do you wear it when you go in your shower? Do you wear it to bed? Isn't it hot? Do the different colors mean anything? It's called a turban. Yes, women wear turbans too. I take it off to shower, and when I go to bed at night. It can be hot. White, blue, and orange are the traditional Sikh colors. No, it's not a cap. I have to tie it anew every time I put it on every day. Why a turban? 2 reasons. First, to show outwardly what Sikhs stand for inwardly, and second, to cover our hair. As part of the Sikh faith tradition, we do not cut our hair anywhere. A turban is a low-tech solution to protecting our hair. In today's terms, turbans are the result of 16th century Sikh design thinking. Step 1, comb out your long hair. Step 2, tie it up in a bun called a rishi knot. Step 3, insert a small comb called a kanga to secure your rishi knot. To make sure your rishi knot and kanga stay put, add an under turban called a patka. At some point, kids take the leap from patka to full turban. That's when you discover that tying good turban is like teaching both an art and a science. Every turban starts with a length of light cotton cloth. A typical piece of turban material is 1 meter wide, 6 meters long. This fabric needs to be pulled, stretched, folded, and coiled so that it can be tied neatly and efficiently into your turban. Turbans are practical, but they're also declarations of values. So the style you choose has to suit your particular work and lifestyle. And your turban has to be a statement of who you are and what principles you are willing to stand up and out for in your life. Whatever your style, tying a turban requires learning some new skills. As is true in our classroom, a hands-on approach leads to rapid progress. Practice leads to mastery, and along the way, there's a lot of messy fun. My style of turban requires starting with one end held firmly in the mouth, then you wrap it around the back of your head and up the front with a flip in the front to change direction and go down the other side. Just have to repeat that 5, 6, 7, or 8 times and you're done. Almost. When you reach the end of the material, you take the piece in your hand, which becomes the finishing touch for the front. The end in your mouth gets pulled around to the back, tucked in to tighten everything up. Be sure to smooth out all the wrinkles, unless you like a really massive headache. Many Sikh women braid their hair and cover it with a scarf. Those who wear turbans favor a clean wrap draped with a chuni, a sheer silk scarf. Sikh women's head coverings, like men's, are hard to miss statements of both self and values. Standing for something different in this day and age is hard. You get a lot of attention wherever you go. Not all of it is welcome. So it really helps to keep a sense of humor about everything and everything that may be going on around you. Some of us take things to a whole new level to highlight what Sikhs stand for. Compassion, service, justice, responsibility, integrity, generosity, courage. Wait a minute, aren't those the very values that we stand for? As Matt said, our values are being challenged today. Science is dismissed as speculation, facts are now opinions, the arts are money wasted, diversity is a threat, honesty matters only if you're caught. As we gaze into the future, are we looking at Mount Olympus or Mordor? To create the future we want for our students, let's focus on this question. How can we teach the essential values that will guide and support our children to grow into fine human beings, contributing to the common good for all and for our planet? Well, they say values are better caught than taught. So today, put on your own turban, real or imaginary. Show the world who you are and what you stand for. Our communities of values are exactly what our students need to grow into the sound citizens and visionary leaders our world so badly needs. Thank you.
Building purpose beyond platitudes. How schools can foster hearts and guts to transform the world. I love this kid. I love his parents. For one, it's early in the morning, so we're waking up. But it also signals the idea that we have to act in the world. We have to sort of have courage and mobilize in all kinds of ways. But we also need to rest and retreat and come together to reflect and refuel so we can do that work, right? It's not an either or. I love the fact that we're in this dome because it kind of feels like a little womb, a little incubation place where we can birth new ideas and refuel and re-energize ourselves for the task ahead. I also really love the theme that the organizing committee chose for us today, right? Power through association, building building communities with purpose. If you had to conjure an image that brought that idea to life, what would it be? For me, the image I thought of came from the new film Hidden Figures, right? And my favorite scene was when Octavia Spencer's character, she was playing, I think, Dorothy Vaughan, after, running up against that ceiling, they didn't want to promote her, they didn't want to give her her due. Her and her team were potentially going to be displaced by the new IBM lab. She wouldn't be promoted finally alone, right? When Kirsten Dunst's character was like, okay, we're going to give you the job. She was like, no, it's me and my girls, right? And so the idea that we move forward together, right? We break out of that sort of competitive mindset that can only be one, and we think about how to bring our power of association to bear on forward movement, right? And so to me, the idea of squad goals, I don't know if you all can see this, it's a little bright in here, so the images may not be coming out as powerfully, but I want us to think about what it means to use our day together to not just network in the traditional sense of kind of schmoozing, professional networks, but really thinking about how we can enhance one another's capacity to do the work we need to do, right? And not thinking about going at it alone. Again, I think the power of taking a day out of our, normal grind is about reconnecting, not only with one another, but reconnecting with ourselves as well. What our purpose in this is, why we were drawn to education in the first place, right? Getting to the heart of what we're doing together, kind of moving beyond the abstract, again, platitudes and principles, and connecting to what keeps us up at night about what we do. So reconnecting on multiple levels across sort of schools, across these wonderful networks, but connecting within ourselves too, as part of the refueling process. So the way that I've structured my remaining comments is to spend another maybe 10 minutes or so just sharing with you a few of the stories that my personal experience of thinking about reconnecting, what is at the heart of my own passions around this, and then sort of thinking about how we move forward together. So for story number one, we can call it the educational grind. When I was in grad school at Berkeley, the first few years especially, getting used to not only the kind of rigor of the program, but in some ways the tunnel vision that's required to get through a program like that. And I remember about year 2, year 3, being up at night sort of grinding my teeth with the stress of it all, right? So much so, after so many years of grinding, now when I try to open my mouth really wide, there's a kind of like pop, right? I can't open my mouth too wide without hearing that pop after so much grinding. And I sort of think about what was that stress about? It's not only about kind of the stress of the work, but in many ways, I think what I was sort of really digging into was the feeling that I had to cut myself off from the things that I really cared about in order to succeed, right? And in some ways, that grinding was like sort of pulling my heart out of it, right? I had to sort of just be all up here, and I couldn't really incorporate what I really cared about, what my passions were, what my communities were in terms of commitment. And I think about how so many of us to fit in the various boxes of educational success, and here I'm thinking from the point of view of our students, fitting those boxes often entails cutting off what's most meaningful to us. Whether it's our passion for community, for justice, thinking about the applications of our work to fit the box, we amputate parts of ourselves. Following this, in many ways, it's felt like I've had to grow back the things I cared about, regenerate my passion, regenerate the heart that sits at the center of education. So this first story is really thinking about, as students, what it means to break out of that educational grind. How can we foster that kind of environment where they don't feel the need to cut off what's most meaningful to them in order to succeed? The second story, the second experience that sort of lays the backdrop for what we'll talk about goes to my experience as a mother. I have a 9th grader and an 11th grader. And as part of the requirements for them to graduate from high school in New Jersey, they have to take a financial literacy class, right? I don't know if any of you have that kind of requirement. And it strikes me as good. Like, we don't want our kids to be in the same kind of debt that we were and have the same kind of financial illiteracy that we have. But at the same time that those kind of priorities are being set, it occurs to me that there are all kinds of other illiteracies that are not being addressed, right? We think about all of the events around racism or sexism that happen in our schools and how we have to ask, what is the responsibility of our schools to require something like a racial literacy in order to be a true citizen and contribute to our societies, right? I remember a year or two ago a situation where some kids were having a party in the basement of one of the local families' homes. And they were playing a very popular beer pong game, Jews versus Nazis, right? In which you have something like an Anne Frank Cup. And there's a whole game around this. And it occurs to me that many of the students involved in this, whether participating or bystanders in this situation, are also at the top of their class, are playing sports, or getting scholarships. So we're graduating thousands and thousands of students every year that have certain kinds of competencies and some basic forms of social and racial illiteracy that I think it's our responsibility as educators to begin to prioritize. Not only for high school students, but we had, for example, some Michigan students giving out these Valentine's Day cards, right? My love for you burns like 6,000 Jews, right? You get into college based on numbers and recommendations without some basic forms of insight about history and society that would make you question this as a good idea, as an expression of love. But it's not only the kind of insensitivity, but a deep, I think, sensitivity that many of our students have to the environment around them that we are responsible to address. The principal of my local middle school, where my son was at the time, called me into the office and said that he found this on the girls' bathroom wall. Welcome to America, where abortion is seen as murder, but a police officer killing a black kid isn't. This following one of the many murders that was happening at the time and is happening at the time. And so his concern was that the kids are feeling it. They want to talk about it. And there's no formal way in which it's being prioritized in the schools and the curriculum. So in many ways, we're not meeting them halfway. They want a way to begin to process and intervene in this reality. And so we got to think about the educational priorities with respect to meeting that keen insight that they already have. How do we formalize them? The third story and background comes more from my experience as a researcher. It was mentioned that I'm a sociologist. I study the social dimensions of biotechnology and other kinds of emerging technologies. And one of the things I get to do on a routine basis is just hang out with people who are innovating all kinds of things in the lab and elsewhere. And I see how much imagination goes into it, how much passion goes into it. We kind of think of science as this kind of, abstract, objective, value-free domain, but there's all kinds of values animating, passion animating, science and technology, including earlier this year a number of breakthroughs that were made in terms of honing cardiac cells, being able to regenerate cardiac cells in laboratories. In this case, we were using mice, but the idea is that eventually we'll be able to do this with humans, and then if you need a transplant, you'll be able to use your own cells to regenerate those organs. It occurs to me that, we have a really advanced imagination when it comes to transforming our biological and material reality. And in some ways, a kind of limp imagination when it comes to transforming our social reality, right? There's an imbalance in many ways, a kind of over-optimism, hyper-optimism when it comes to one set of things, right? And a real deep cynicism or pessimism that we can ever really do anything about the social ills that affect us. And so one of the challenges I want to propose, and which I sort of try to do in my research, is challenge scientists, challenge public policy folks to animate that other imagination. Because if we can regenerate heart cells in a lab, right? Why can't we begin to regenerate empathy in our everyday lives, right? So I think we have to rebalance our priorities with respect to our passion and how we're going to create young people who are not only proficient in terms of technology and science, but in terms of human society, right? In terms of connecting with other human beings. And so in many ways, when we think about our schools, we have grand mission statements. We can think of those mission statements as blueprints, right? And blueprints are great. We need plans. But the challenge is, how do we take those plans? How do we take those platitudes and operationalize them? How do we begin to design environments, classrooms, relationships that actually mirror our highest ideals? So as we begin to think about how, I'd like to share one final story with you that in some ways gets us thinking beyond the framework of access to quality education and more about the design of learning, right? So we're going to shift from access to design. And one way I like to do that is through a story about a simple bench that was a turning point for me. And some of you may have heard this story before. But I'm a Southern California girl mostly, and my first job was in Boston. So as I got used to the winters, any chance I could to travel to anywhere warmer, I jumped at it. And on those trips, I would just try to steal some time between meetings to just kind of soak in some sunshine, get some vitamin D. This particular bench in Berkeley, it's across from one of my favorite flea markets that I like to go to and get some curry rotis, and in this case, I just wanted to lay in the sun. And I couldn't lay down on the bench for this 30 minutes. Why couldn't I lay down on the bench? The armrests were there, and I thought, okay, all right, I'm not that skinny, so I can't get in between there, although I've tried before. I'm desperate. But I thought, okay, there's a lot of possible reasons why those armrests were designed into that bench, right? I mean, you can think about the fact that it can help someone with mobility issues going up and down, right? When I was 9 months pregnant, it could come in handy, right, to get up and down. You can think about the kind of privacy that it sort of offers. If someone's sitting down, you don't know them, you may be more likely to sit down next to them with those armrests. But the first thought I had, first place my mind went was, you know what? It probably has something to do with trying to deter people from using the bench to sleep in terms of homelessness, right? We think about, I won't go too much into this, but if we think about, in many ways, the relationship between the booming tech industry in the Bay Area and the growth of homelessness in the area, there's some interesting rabbit holes we could dig into. But for our purposes now, I thought, you know what, there's some cute boutiques around here, little antique stores, you know, they're probably trying to control who has access in some ways to this space. And with a little digging, I found this wasn't just a Bay Area phenomenon. I found single occupancy benches in Helsinki, so no laying down there. And you better have a really skinny butt too. I found cage benches in France. In this town, the mayor put them out, and the town people rose up so quickly and so vehemently that he had to remove them within 24 hours. He put them out on Christmas Eve of all times. So this story indicates that we can mobilize to challenge discriminatory designs of all kinds, right? We can work together collectively to do something about it. But my favorite example of what I'm calling discriminatory design is the metered bench, where you actually have to put in some coins to use the bench, right? I think you get like 15 minutes, so you should not get lost in your favorite book. That would be painful. But in this case, this bench was designed by a German artist. In fact, to get us thinking critically about public space, to get us thinking critically about the privatization of public life, that we can apply from everything to healthcare to prisons, right? Thinking about what it means to put a price tag in this way on something that should be a collective good, right? And so we can begin to think about how, discriminatory design does a number of things in addition to excluding. One of the things it does is it offers a technological fix for what is in fact a much wider social problem, right? If we think about, the crisis in housing and homelessness, this is a kind of fix that not only offers this technology or bench to intervene, but what it also does is it locates the problem inside certain kinds of people, right? Like the so-called loiter. It says the problem is you. We need to get you out of sight, out of mind, and then we can pretend that the issue isn't there, right? So it's what Du Bois would call, problem people. How does it feel to be a problem? We can think about this in our schools in terms of, as we face challenges, being careful not to label particular kinds of students or even particular kinds of colleagues as the locus of the problem, and thinking about how the environment, what is the wider challenge to which people are responding. And so we want to shift the lens to a kind of social environmental diagnosis rather than an individualized diagnosis that pathologizes kinds of people. The challenge for us then, thank you, I'm so glad that resonates. What values are we embedding in our schools, in our students? How can we move beyond the blueprints, beyond the mission statements, to designing things differently, not assuming that what we currently have is simply about having more people have access to it. It's about thinking about what in the design is doing the excluding. What are the armrests in our classes, in our schools, right? How can we think more creatively and change the status quo? So in the time remaining, I'll just spend, go through 5 possible tools that we can begin to employ more deliberately. I bet most of our school communities represented here, most of the educators are already doing versions of this. So in naming them, I just want to crystallize what you are in fact likely already engaged in, and also to say there's likely many more tools than what I'm going to describe. I'm just going to go through 5 that I think are particularly salient to the conversation, and maybe they'll come up in the sessions today. And the acronym for it is SHALT, to help you remember. Thou shalt use this toolkit. So, tool number 1 for thinking about how we might design differently, right, is what we can think of as social literacy. Again, going back to the requirement of financial literacy. What does it mean to have the skills? Both that we have the skills and that we're cultivating the skills of our students to read reality more precisely, more accurately, right? We can think of it as having different kinds of lenses that we put on reality to frame, to bring certain things into view. And one of the sort of points around social literacy that I would like to highlight is, yes, we all have different lenses, right? Based on our background, based on our expertise. But I would say, in fact, not all lenses are created equal in terms of the accuracy and precision with which they reflect reality, in part because of the deep-seated social stratification and histories of domination that we have inherited by virtue of being born in this country. Many of us for whom this society was designed inherit what we might think of as rose-tinted lenses, right? In the way in which you are, how the good things come into view, how things are working come into view, but the deep-seated stratification, the fault lines, the pain and the violence often recede from view. And so what we have to begin to do is actually clean our lenses and actually prioritize those who have often been the underside of this design, who have been excluded from this design, because to navigate society, this was designed against you, in order to navigate it and survive it, you have to really hone your ability to see where the landmines are, right? And so we want to be able to bring those views and those voices into the conversation to say, it's not simply that I want to include you and have you in the room as a kind of cosmetic diversity to make us feel good, but we want to understand your experience as a source of knowledge that we all need in order to move forward, right? It's thinking about the lens as insight, not simply as window dressing, if you will. We can think about the experiences of this young man. Do you all recognize him? Ahmed Muhammad. Oh, it's quite dark, at least from this view. Ahmed Muhammad, a few years ago, 14-year-old Texas teenager, went to school with a quite innovative contraption in his backpack. Do you remember what it was? Yeah, so he designed a clock out of his, I think, pencil box. And what did they think it was when he got to school? A bomb. So his teacher, his principal, called him out, and I think 5 police officers interrogated him. He was eventually expelled. His family eventually had to go back to Kuwait. I think they came back last summer, but a whole ordeal. Not recognizing his genius, his resourcefulness, his knowledge, right? But assuming, based on deep-seated Islamophobia and xenophobia, racism, that what he had designed, what he had innovated was a bomb. Now, it's very tempting when we hear stories like this to pick out the bad apples, right? The teacher, the principal overreacted, the racism of individuals. But to do that, in fact, is acknowledging one layer of the issue. But it's not quite reading the social reality accurately, right? Because we're telling a story of bad apples when what we really need to hone is our ability to understand the orchard, right? To understand how this is being cultivated. Otherwise, we kind of keep getting surprised over and over again. Oh my gosh, this bad thing happened. Oh my gosh, this bad thing happened, right? And so the bad apples keep cropping up, and so we need to kind of zoom the lens out and say, let's figure out what's going on with this orchard that these apples keep popping up. One of the things we would have to wrestle with in reading this social reality more accurately is that 1 in 2 Americans, when surveyed, believe Arab Americans should carry special ID cards. This is not a phenomenon of individual bad teachers or principals. It's a milieu. It's a much more collective phenomenon in which perhaps the majority of people are not jumping to the same conclusions as those teachers, but the majority of us are remaining silent in the face of it. We are either indifferent or not courageous to speak out and address it, right? The vast middle, as opposed to the extremes. So to read the reality is the first step into to be able to transform the reality. Likewise, we had a situation in Charleston, South Carolina, where, in many schools now, we have police officers kind of roaming the halls and called in as part of the disciplinary design of our institutions. In this case, the young student was on her cell phone in class when she couldn't, or when she shouldn't be. I think she was having some family problems in terms of foster care and so on. And the teacher told her to get off her cell phone and eventually called the officer, who went on to slam the student out of her desk and onto the floor. Not a rare occurrence, right? Again, we could tell this story kind of myopic basically a story of bad apples, the officer, the teacher, the principal, all of whom should be accountable to this particular situation. But it's not a rare situation for students to be mistreated in this way, so we have to think about what's the orchard, what's the larger milieu. Part of that is the disciplining of black students in particular, the dramatic rates of suspension and expulsion. In my little town of Princeton, the community challenged the school board and the superintendent to give us the numbers. Even to get the numbers was quite a task. And it turned out that black students in our town were being suspended 8 times more than white students. And in the conversation in the town hall meeting, the superintendent was saying, but the numbers overall are so low. The numbers overall are so low. And the members of the community said, it really doesn't matter. We need to understand what's going on here with this disproportion. It's not the overall numbers, it's this inequity. Thou shalt. The H has to do with historical literacy and very closely related to social literacy. How many historians in the house? History teachers, woohoo! So in fact, we need historical literacy across the curriculum. Across the curriculum, not only limited to one class, because so much of the reality in which we find ourselves now is that we've inherited so many ideas and practices that we take for granted as natural, as given, right? And what we need to begin to do is understand that the past is not past, as it were, right? And so in this case, we have the artist Hank Willis Thomas giving us this reflection of football player and an enslaved individual picking cotton. Not to say that there's a direct correlation or a direct continuity, but to just get us thinking again, like that German artist, about how our current crisis with respect to, race and masculinity and even sports has precursors. And we need to begin to think about this and bring this into the conversation so our students understand this did not start with Colin Kaepernick, right? This has a much longer genealogy. And how can we give them the lens to understand this continuity that we're living through? I think an individual I think of as a social theorist, Chris Rock, kind of puts it best with respect to historical literacy. The thing is, we treat racism in this country like it's a style that America went through, like flared legs and lava lamps. Oh, that crazy thing we did. We were hanging black people. We treat it like a fad instead of a disease that eradicates millions of people. You've got to get it at a lab, he says, and study it, and see its origins, and see what it's immune to, and what breaks it down. For me, that idea of it being a fad, a hot button issue, something that was invented between Fox and MSNBC, right? A thing about sound bites and headlines really does it a huge disservice in terms of taking the current crisis seriously, right? Because if we understood the historical roots of what we're living through, I think the way that we would be approaching it would be as someone who was trying to treat a cancer that was growing and growing and growing. We would take it so seriously and prioritize it, not as an add-on, not as something sort of ancillary that we have the option to discuss or not, right? But as something that is crucial, that our lives depend on it. Thou shalt. The A, I think, refers in this case to thinking about emotion, but affect more broadly, right? Attitudes, perceptions. How do we hone both our own and our students' affective acuity? The reason I like this image is because it's really thinking about emotion as intelligence, as not emotion, something in the heart and then something in the mind, this kind of binary, but thinking about emotion and affect as actually integral to being able to know things, right? To be able to have knowledge, right? We have to be able to feel. So much of what we have done is cut off the things we need most in order to know accurately and correctly, right? And so in this way, I think we have to be able to take it not simply as, all of the tests dealing with IQ, but what would it mean to actually actually cultivate emotional and affective intelligence and prioritize it and say, actually, your ability to go to college, you're going to need this, right? It's not simply this math and reading and so on. How do we not simply measure, that's not the point, but cultivate it with the same priority? I think our students both reveal a deep hunger for it. In this case, Hunger Games was indicative. When the first film came out, I don't know if many of you followed the Twitter phenomenon. When young people were coming out of the film, many of whom had read the book, there was a flurry of tweets in which, when Amandla Sandberg's character, Ruha, was killed in the film, young people came out and said things like, awkward moment when Ruha is some black girl and not the little blonde, innocent girl you picture. Call me racist, but when I found out Ruha was black, her death wasn't as sad. Hashtag I hate myself. So it's interesting, acknowledging the lack of empathy, but also realizing that he felt bad about not having that empathy. It's a kind of tension where they want to be able to grow that beyond the racist lenses that they've inherited, but at the same time, a really admirable honesty to say, I don't actually feel that empathy for her, because she doesn't mirror the little innocent girl in my imagination when I was reading the book. You know, we're not going to age out of racism, right? This is not a matter of just like an older generation kind of dying off. Right? Because we're not prioritizing and dealing with it, our young people are inheriting it. And it's our responsibility to begin to give them, to cultivate the empathy that would make this world livable. Thou shalt. The L, linguistic reflexivity. Again, they're leading the way. This little kid's like, I don't care if you can't read it. This is what I stand for. Right? Or her. I love it. Linguistic reflexivity. Let's think carefully and critically about the language we use to diagnose our social reality. You know, we have that little children saying sticks and stones, right? In fact, I would say sticks and stones will only break your bones. But words will stay with you for a lifetime. I bet all of us can think of something someone told us when we were young that stuck with us. And often it's the painful stuff that sticks with us, you know? And so I think we have to really be careful about the words we use, both to talk with our young people and also the words we use to explain to them what's happening around us. One simple example. If you go to your Word document, you type in 2 words. Underserved and overserved. Your computer will recognize one of these as a thing that exists in the world, right? We have language to talk about when people are being harmed, but not necessarily language to talk about when people are unduly benefiting from our discriminatory designs. That is, in this case, overserved is not even acknowledged as a thing. But a very basic principle in sociology is that everything is relational. In fact, our racial categories, right, our ideas of black and white were formed in relation to one another. These are not inherent characteristics of people. It's an ideology to justify injustice that was formed in relation. For there to be a black, there has to be a white, but often white is invisible. White is the center, right? It doesn't exist. White people don't have a race. Everyone else does. Similarly, overserved and underserved. In this case, we can recognize the idea of underserved, right? In many ways, we have so many examples of charity and helping and doing things for the underserved. Many of our students, in terms of community service, are encouraged to help the underserved. In In so doing, often what we do is we invisibilize the what's in relation to, what's happening with the overserved, right? For us to really transform society, we have to deal with both ends of this phenomenon. For starters, can we have language around it, right? And not such that obscures the relationship. I think I want to petition, whatever it is, Webster, to actually include this in our lexicon, right? We should be able to talk about the overserved. Thou shalt, the T. Everywhere around us we have solutions that are technological fixes. Download this, upload that, include this gadget, right? Nothing wrong with that. We have to see that as, tools, but we have to understand that the true transformation is going to come in our social relationships, right? And so we want to think about how do we begin to embed the values that we care most about, that are in the blueprints, in the everyday infrastructure, the systems, both the social systems and the technological systems. Technology is not going to save us, right? Quick example. The algorithms, the platforms, the software that is embedded in our everyday lives are created by human beings. Whatever the values, the assumptions, the insights, the knowledge that those human beings have are designed into these platforms, right? There are many, many examples. In fact, my breakout session is going to go into this in a little more depth in terms of how we think about these technological platforms. Simple exercise. A few people played around with this last year. Put 3 black teenagers in a Google search and found that the vast majority of images that popped up were young people with mugshots, right? The vast majority of images that popped up with 3 white teenagers were like Gap stock images, right? Of little wholesome kids hanging on each other. 3 Asian teenagers, again, reinforcing some common stereotypes. The vast majority of images were scantily clad young women, hypersexualized, right? And on and on. And so we have to think about these algorithms, these search tools, how in many ways we can use them as insight into our deep-seated values and assumptions and biases. We call this in science and technology studies machine bias or algorithmic discrimination, right? The take home is that our technological platforms reflect our society, right? And so we can't look to them as the kind of fix for it. We have to look inside of ourselves first. So as we begin to repurpose our schools, right? Think about what we stand for, take it off the page and into the capillaries, into the arteries of our everyday interactions. These are just a few of the tools that we can begin to operationalize. Social literacy, historical literacy, affective acuity, linguistic reflexivity, and technological humility, right? And so I'll end with a story, another personal story, just to get us thinking about how we take all this and how we begin to walk together, right? Not doing it alone, right? Squad goals. These are my parents, hard to see, on their wedding day. So a few years ago, my father had a stroke. He had been as a college football player, very active. He'd done a lot of, he was just a very big figure, both in terms of his personality and in terms of his physique. And a few years ago, he had a stroke. And as part of the healing process, as he was learning to walk, I would visit him in Cedars-Sinai, downtown LA. And he was kind of explaining to me, the nitty-gritty of the process of trying to learn to walk again as an adult, right? And one of the things that it occurred to him was that he had to reflect on how babies learn to walk in the first place, right? Instead of going back in time. He said, as it is, the physical therapy that he was doing where, he had 2 nurses standing alongside him, walking him down the hallway, taking one step in front of the other. He was very tempted, in order not to fall, to keep looking down at his feet because he couldn't feel the whole left side of his body. So he wanted to see when his foot was on the ground so he knew when to go again. And he wanted to, not fall over and make a fool of himself. And he was doing this, and he felt good in the moment, but he realized he would never ever learn to walk again if he kept looking down. Because for his brain to actually regenerate those circuits, like a baby, when they're learning, he had to look up, right? He had to look up so that the brain would be able to map those circuits. If he looked down, it wouldn't. And so he explained how that idea of looking up, it's riskier. You're maybe more likely to fall, but that's really the only way to intervene in the paralysis, right? To begin to regenerate. Eventually he did. He not only walked, he ran a 5K, he was driving, he went back to work, etc., after a grueling process. And the takeaway that he was trying to impress upon me was this idea of it's going to be clumsy, it's going to be messy, right? It's going to be risky, but as we try to intervene in our social paralysis that we're experiencing right now, it's going to be very tempting to do what's safe, right? To look up as we go forward, to do what we've always done, right? So many of our schools, we know how to do diversity, at least somewhat, right? We know how to celebrate difference. We do that. Whether we do it well, but we kind of have a grip on that. That's looking down in many ways, not really challenging ourselves. We also, again, know somewhat the idea of helping the underserved, right? And we cultivate that skill and that disposition in our students. We're looking down when we do this. We're really not going to press ourselves past the social paralysis that we feel. We have to challenge ourselves to think about what will it mean going forward, walking together to take risks, to do what we haven't done before, to look up. What will that mean to actually tackle inequity, not simply celebrate diversity? What will it mean to challenge the overserved and not simply help the underserved? And the list goes on and on. The point being, I hope in our conversations today that we move out of our comfort zones and we prepare to be clumsy. We prepare to fall on our faces, right? And in the same way that my father was trying to teach me, really cultivate our imagination of where we want to go. Look up, right? Because I really think if we can begin to imagine where we want to go, like a baby walking forward towards the thing that it wants, we'll begin to regenerate our capacity to do it, and we will create it. Thank you for your attention.